Welcome to the NYC Love Kitchen Podcast.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarde Gumalo. I'm a first-year master's student at Teachers College, Columbia University. I'm studying nutrition education and...
Hi everyone, my name is Mikaela Zieter. I am also a first-year student, a master's student at Columbia Teachers College. We are both getting our MSRDN on the path to becoming registered dietitians, and I am concentrating in exercise physiology.
Yeah, and we've been here today as a part of working with NYC Love Kitchen. We connected with this organization because we're taking a community nutrition class together. So we were assigned to work with a community organization for the semester, and we connected with NYC Love Kitchen. And we have been given the opportunity to be guests on their podcast, which is so special for us. The NYC Love Kitchen team has posed a few questions for us today, and I think it'll help clarify a lot of questions that the public generally has about nutrition. And we also did a special project with NYC Love Kitchen, visited their food pantry, and we're going to talk a little bit about our results with that today as well.
Yeah.
So I thought that we might just dive right into the questions. So the first question that we were posed is, how do we define nutritious food? What do you think about that, Mikaela?
I think on a base level, that nutritious food consists of mostly whole foods, not heavily processed, with a diverse range of micronutrients that ensure longevity, as in a long, healthful life. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that something that I like to really consider too is thinking about the words nutritious and nourishing, and how we want foods to be nutrient dense and to really help us with live long, healthy, beautiful lives, but that we want the foods ultimately to be nourishing to us, to be able to connect us to maybe deeper to ourselves and the values that we have, or to be able to share meals with your family, with your friends, and connect with community. So I think food is really all-encompassing, and that health in general is a lot broader than we think. It's not just about being the healthiest version of yourself or being free of disease. I think that health is feeling secure physically, mentally, emotionally, and culturally, and that nutritious food is a means to be able to reach that goal. Yeah. Do you have any more?
Beautifully said. No, I think you covered it really well, as nutritious food really is all-encompassing. I liked your comment about food also being nourishing kind of to the soul, and it also has cultural roots. I will get us to our next question. What do you think are some of the barriers to people eating nutritious foods?
Yeah, I think that there are so many barriers today, and that we can go through a few of them that people have in wanting to eat nutritiously. The first one that comes to mind for me is just taste and preference. A lot of people think that nutritious foods don't necessarily taste the best, but I think more so what the barrier is that our palates are accustomed to a certain type of food, and that starts right from when we're born, or right when we're in our mother's wombs. Our taste buds are already accustoming to certain flavors. And so in terms of taste and preference for nutritious foods, we've learned studies, right, that a person needs to try something 14 times in order to develop a taste for it. And so, especially when we think about people from lower incomes, or just some people don't have as much access to fruits and vegetables or nutritious foods as others, and they might not get as many opportunities as others to try those foods 14 times so that their palate's accustomed to nutritious foods. And so, also, if we're thinking about folks who live in poverty or live off of food stamps, they can't afford to waste money on foods that might not be eaten, that they don't like yet. So there's a lot of challenges with taste and preference. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, that was a really good point made, especially in terms of food access. Even the different like supplemental programs that are federally provided, such as SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, it's really difficult for families to even apply. Like it's not an easy process. There's not a lot of assistance readily given. And to stay on SNAP, you have to be making a certain amount of money. You can't be making too much money, but have to be not being paid under the table. There's just a lot of really strict rules that SNAP adheres to its participants, which can make it hard for a family to get SNAP originally and then stay on SNAP because, like previously said, you can't be making too much money. And these programs are also supplemental. They still don't necessarily provide enough money to be, as you said, like really adventurous in terms of buying new produce, which can be really challenging. I think access is such a large barrier for people to eat nutritiously just because they don't have the same freedom to be adventurous and try new vegetables or even purchase fresh vegetables.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the important thing to consider with SNAP is that, just like you said, number one, it's really hard to sign up for it in the first place. They don't make it easy for people to. I think it's a really good point that you raised about SNAP and how it helps people gain food access, but that it's really hard to apply for, and that they don't make it easy for people to apply for or for people to stay on it for very long. And that I think another important point is that a lot of people fall through the cracks in terms of SNAP benefits. So if you are an immigrant or if you are mentally challenged or homeless, there's a lot of people that can't benefit from SNAP, and then that's where a lot of community organizations come in to fill the gap, like NYC Love Kitchen, that are providing emergency food assistance for folks who need food as soon as possible. And yeah, I think uh, with food access, that like location is also really important too, in your food environment, right?
Oh, 100%, especially in terms of how certain communities are targeted by the fast food industry, as in like lower income communities will have a higher availability of fast food restaurants in comparison to grocery stores that have nutritious options available. It's as if that industry is targeting the people that need, that maybe don't have as much knowledge in terms of nutrition or the money to afford some like upscale grocery stores, which is kind of like setting them up for diets high in ultra processed foods that these fast food restaurants provide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you also mentioned having knowledge, which I think is also a big barrier for folks who are trying to eat nutritiously. There's so much noise out there about what's healthy and what's not healthy, or just new diets, and I think that people become really overwhelmed, and that sadly food can become more of a stressor than something that can benefit their health and their well-being, or something that can bring them joy. So I think nutritional knowledge is one thing, and that also being able to cook, like having cooking skills. I think that now more than ever, our lives are more demanding than they ever could be. And that simply having time, or just having the time to practice and fail in the kitchen, is not something that a lot of people have anymore. And that convenience foods and takeout and food delivery services have made it really, really easy for us, to not be preparing those foods that you mentioned that are minimally processed and more like whole plant-based foods. Yeah, what other barriers do people have in terms of nutritious foods? Let's see.
I think in general, our food supply nowadays is really dominated by those ultra processed foods that our bodies kind of become addicted to. And that's with our hunger hormones telling you to eat more when necessarily your body doesn't need to eat more, doesn't want to eat more. It's now more important than ever to really focus on eating whole foods because of how heavy our food industry pushes ultra processed foods that frankly manipulate your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the hard thing is that a lot of people attach a lot of morality with food too. Like if I'm not able to eat healthily, um, then I'm failing. Like I don't have enough willpower. But like what you were just saying, the food supply that dominates the industry makes it really hard for us to make good choices. And just exactly what you were saying, in terms of food having this addictive quality, ultra processed foods hijack our taste buds in a way that they were literally formulated in combinations of texture, flavor, mouthfeel that do not exist in nature. It doesn't exist, these combinations. And so our food supply makes it very hard for us to choose well for ourselves, I think.
No, definitely.
Um, yeah. So our next question is, how does good nutrition lead to good health?
Ooh, what a good question. I think in a very general standpoint, nutritious diets can be preventative for a variety of ailments, including like cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and certain cancers, especially getting back to ultra processed foods. Diets that are high in ultra processed foods negatively impact your hunger and satiety cues. Basically, as previously mentioned, like messing with your own ability to tell yourself you're full, causing you to eat more calorically dense and foods that aren't as beneficial. And they also have an addictive nature, affecting us similarly to how a drug may affect us. Again, causing individuals to eat more calorically dense than they would, which in turn has the potential to negatively affect your health. But these foods are often cheaper, and advertisements often target populations that need something that's convenient and cheap, which again makes it difficult to eat in a way that is good for your health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like the other thing that I want to bring up, in terms of when we're asking how does good nutrition lead to good health, personally, and I'm a nutrition student, we're both nutrition students, but I feel like nutrition is not the full picture when it comes to good health, and that a lot of people really put a lot of pressure on like what they want to eat, but that there are so many other things that we need to consider, like physical activity, reducing your stress, and getting good sleep. Those are all really important things. And that nutrition is not some silver bullet. Like if you were able to eat everything completely nutrient dense or just support your health in the best way possible, it won't prevent you from getting certain diseases. And actually, physical activity, we found, studies have shown that it's maybe 2 times more important than like the food that you eat. So as long as you're staying physically active and you're reducing stress and good sleep, those are all connected. And actually, if you are able to exercise more, you're going to sleep better and you're going to relieve your mental health and your stress. And so they're all intertwined. And I think that connection is really important. Yeah.
Very important, especially in terms of thinking about good health, in terms of like longevity, wanting to live a long life with few health complications, and strength training. Strength training with weights, I feel like is kind of in today's world sometimes looked down upon because it makes you bulkier or heavier, when in actuality it's linked to increased longevity and keeping healthy bones and keeping you active at an older age, and it's just really valuable in terms of that overall scope of longevity, living longer without health complications.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that's a really good point that you make. I think strength training is meant to be for everyone, and that even I think of like my mom and how important it is to just like be able to like challenge your bones maybe every twice a week just to help you stay strong and prevent like osteoporosis and like weakening of bones and things like that. And I guess the other thing that I wanted to bring up in terms of pursuing good health that we haven't mentioned yet is the importance of social connections, right? So, and having community, and that food is a vehicle to be able to spend time with your community, because obviously we know that if for people who lack social connections, your mental health declines. And so many things become way harder to do, to, those other health promoting behaviors. If you're on your own, they're like way more harder to do. So I just want to stress the importance of having social connections too.
No, of course. Well, also in our research, we were looking into some of the struggles that migrants and immigrants have. One of them was connected to food and not having access to the same meals or types of food that are culturally relevant and important to them, and how that can be a major cause for increased stressors, which ultimately results in lower health outcomes.
Yeah, and we're talking about migrants and the migrant crisis and refugees because we learned a lot about that population working with NYC Love Kitchen, and that like you mentioned, not having access to the dishes and the foods that you're familiar with definitely causes a lot of stress and a lot of longing. But I think that we also need to remember that these people have been through experiences that we could never imagine. And so just like remembering that source of trauma, or just especially in terms of, when we're serving or working with these people, keeping that in mind, and like remembering kind of like the power dynamics there, and just approaching everyone with humility, right? And yeah, those social connections are not just for them, they're for us too. And yeah.
Beautifully said. As we previously mentioned, we had performed research at one of the food pantries. Do you want to start off revealing some of the findings from our research at an NYC Love Kitchen food pantry?
Yeah. So for our class, because we were part of this organization, we were also assigned to come up with a special project to do while we're here. So the nature of where our research came from is exactly what we were just talking about. Wanting to promote cultural relevance for the populations being served by NYC Love Kitchen. We had been told about the recent migrant crisis and how there had been a large influx of being able to serve folks like that. So I think that we were really wondering, is the food that's been being given at these food pantries by NYC Love Kitchen, is it culturally appropriate for these folks? Are there any foods that they're looking for to receive in the bags that they're not currently getting? And yeah, so that was sort of our research question, right? And I think at least for me, I can speak for myself, that my expectation was that we were going to hear like, oh, I would really love to see this food. I really miss this food. But we were surprised to find that most people were incredibly happy and incredibly grateful for the food that they were receiving, and that most people weren't able to really say like, I actually don't really have anything that I can come up with that I would want to request, and that most people used pretty much all of the food items that were provided in the bag. And so I think that was a true learning experience for me. I think that as like academic people and like having good intentions, we want to like serve and help other populations, but that maybe having that question was a little bit othering in a way, assuming that like that these foods aren't culturally relevant for them. But actually, I think that folks were just happy to have food at all. And that was really humbling for me to learn. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. I assumed that, especially with our question directly relating to how many of the food items do you not use or throw out, I was expecting there to at least be some common threads, either due to a lack of knowledge in how to prepare a certain good or just disliking the food item. And there was relatively none expressed, which was, again, very humbling for me as well.
Yeah. And I do want to point out, just for full transparency, that we did have a small sample. There was maybe around 50, less
like
than 50 people that we interviewed, and we were only able to do this at one food pantry. So ideally, I think if this survey was able to be conducted numerous times, you might get different results, but that's overwhelmingly what we found. And the other thing that I wanted to say was the way that we did it was we asked these questions directly to the community members. And so there's a potential that they might have felt some pressure or not feeling like they were comfortable enough to speak openly or honestly. So I think that those are just some things to consider in terms of like the research that we found. But that generally people were very happy, right?
Yes, no,
What
very
else, what else did
happy.
we find though? What else were you?
Something that really shocked me was how many people that we had talked to had nutrition related health problems that may have, which was the main reason for why they wouldn't consume a certain food item given. For example, a lot of customers admitted to having high blood pressure or diabetes. And it really was eye-opening on how many members of this population were dealing with with nutrition related health struggles. Since there also are nutrition therapies to help with these ailments, and yet they're incredibly difficult to acquire if you are relying on food pantries and supplemental programs for your main source of food. It can be really difficult to have the freedom to modify your diet to be truly health accommodating.
Yeah. And I think that it's definitely probably a big challenge for food pantries to be able to accommodate or even like individualize the food that they give out for folks with specific medical issues. Right. But I think that what we do want to remind everyone is that there are standards, nutrition standards in terms of the kinds of foods that food pantries can give out to folks. So it's not like these food pantries are giving out ultra processed foods or anything. They're totally whole foods, but we're talking about folks like you mentioned that have diabetes, high blood pressure. Some folks were actually vegetarian, and so I think people were talking about not being able to use the meat that they receive, but they're like, but I can just give it to my neighbor. So there's that connection again. Yeah, so there's some challenges, but overall, I think very, very good findings, positive findings that we had. Yeah.
No, and very successful setup for possible future surveys to really kind of get into maybe really assessing like the health needs of the community as well, and how possibly the food options may be able to be slightly more accommodating to that. Even though it's such a struggle to be so personalized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ready to move on to our next question?
Yeah.
Okay. So the next question is, how do we demystify the assumption that healthy food is expensive?
Oof,
Good question.
that is a good question. I think there is this understanding that in order for food to be health promoting or healthy, it has to be fresh, organic. Like it's healthy if it's fresh. Frozen vegetables, which can be stored for a way longer period of time and are also less expensive, have the same micronutrient composition and are just as health benefiting as a fresh vegetable would be. And it's a weird stigma to have that fresh is always better. Maybe people have like taste preferences for fresh, but balling on a budget, like frozen vegetables are also great. I'm a vegetarian, and I'm a big fan of canned beans. They're a super affordable source of plant protein, which is very health beneficial. I always get questions about my life as a vegetarian, as people just assume it's more expensive because I'm having to buy more fresh vegetables and plant-based proteins, which some tofus can be like really expensive, or the impossible meat can be really expensive as well. But I always say that I spend way less now that I'm a vegetarian because you can buy beans that are canned, which is very affordable. Frozen vegetables, very affordable. Even canned vegetables, just keeping a lookout for low sodium, also very affordable. I think if you're creative with it, it's really achievable to be healthy on a lower budget. It is harder, definitely. And not having nutrition knowledge can, again, make it more challenging.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. And I feel like the other point that I want to bring up is that there's a reason why healthier food is more expensive in our country. And rather, I feel like I want to say that in a different way, that processed food is cheaper in our country. And that's because corn and soy, like growing corn and soy, which is the major components of processed food, it's highly subsidized by the government. So in terms of like the actual farming or growing of like other produce, like other healthy foods, it may or may not be that it requires more energy or like more inputs to grow those foods. It could be that it's actually more affordable to grow those foods than it is for corn or soy, which make up processed foods. But it's just that the government subsidizes foods that are more processed. And so it's just kind of like where their priority lies. So I feel like just kind of like having that background info, it's like, oh, this is not meant to be expensive, but that's some foods can be. But that, like you mentioned, having the knowledge can really empower you to find the options that are cheaper or that are budget friendly. And that's something that we always like to talk about is like looking at the grocery store shelves for the generic store brands, right? Like that at Whole Foods, if you're shopping at Whole Foods, like the 365 brand. And yeah, I think that like we often go into the grocery store with the idea that like, oh, I can't get this. It's like because it's healthy. But like, I think that if you just look a little bit more closely and try not to go in leading with that assumption, you'll be surprised with what you can find that's nutritious that's affordable, right?
I like that little note.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also in terms of organic, I feel like there's this big assumption in United States that organic is healthier and organic is better. When organic is more tied to the way at which like the food grows and how farmers operate. And it is a better way to farm for our environment, but organic is not inherently healthier than generic.
Yeah, I feel like I just want to explain that a little bit more for everyone. So, organic agriculture, if something's grown organic, it just means that there's no pesticides used. They're not genetically modified in any kind of way. And that, like you mentioned, the way that they're grown, they're using methods that promote the overall soil health and like take into account the environment. So if you're thinking that I need to buy organic in order to be healthy, it's not necessarily about how that food affects your body. It's more about that it was grown in a more environmentally sustainable way. There are some studies that show that, if you don't buy organic in terms of like pesticide use, that there is a possibility of like cancer risks and things like that. But like just in terms of like having more nutrients, there's no difference really.
No.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay. Do you want to hear our last question?
Sure.
What was your favorite part about working with the NYC Love Kitchen?
So I think that I really appreciated just seeing firsthand the reality of how a food pantry works, but also just how community organization works. And kind of like all of the logistics that go behind running a food pantry and even learning about how food is like sourced from the food bank. So folks have to be registered and at each food pantry so that the food bank knows how much food would be needed to be supplied, and just kind of like navigating the barriers of like what happens on food pantry day was like really interesting to see. So I think I just really loved like the firsthand experience of like, wow, this is how everything goes.
No.
What about you?
Yeah, no, I definitely also agree that kind of seeing behind the scenes and what goes in the inner workings as I've like volunteered at other food pantries before, but never been so like really seen behind that curtain and like what goes on when the direct pantry isn't operating. I also really enjoyed getting to be so hands-on with the community, especially when we were doing our surveys, getting to talk with some of the customers and just hear about their experience. It was really heartwarming to see and meet directly with the people that you were impacting instead of something that was a little bit more detached. It felt really nice to kind of get to be a part of the community as well and interact with, again, the community that NYC Love Kitchen gets to serve.
Yeah, for sure. And I think overall also what I've learned working with the organization is how important smaller local nonprofits are in terms of filling a need for people who are hungry. Like we mentioned before, and honestly, like it's just some of the food insecurity is just kind of those rates are rising today ever since like the pandemic and so many different issues are causing food insecurity to be on the rise. But I think that smaller organizations like NYC Love Kitchen that are targeted to local communities are just much more nimble and that they're able to like directly serve the needs of people in a more like we were talking about individualizing things. Bit like rather than like bigger organizations and their role. So I think like every organization has a place and everyone has a role, and it was just really inspiring to see how that all of that works.
No, yeah. And NYC Love Kitchen's role in also kind of fighting for food justice. And even though pantries are still considered emergency services, they are not emergency services to such a large segment of the communities that a lot of them serve. It's not just something that after COVID has been a need. People rely on these for their monthly and daily lives. So
it's been such a pleasure to be able to have an opportunity to be on a podcast. This is my first time. Is it your
Oh yeah,
first time
definitely
being
my
on
first time as
a
well.
podcast? Yeah, so we're really grateful for the opportunity, and I think that it's really nice for us to be able to voice the knowledge that we've learned so far. And like we aren't experts, but we are learners, and I think nutrition is a topic that's people have a lot of trouble with, or that you mentioned to me before. It's undervalued in our society, but I think that most people have a lot of questions about their food. It's something that people need to eat every day. So it's been a pleasure to share what we know and also to just have this experience, right?
Yes, no, I've definitely loved getting to tap a little bit into my nutrition knowledge just to hopefully pass on little tidbits to whoever's listening. Nutrition education is just so applicable for everyone. It is really valuable in terms of living fuller lives and also longevity and promoting a healthful, disease-free state. So I'm really thankful that NYC Love Kitchen let us on the podcast.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. My name is Sarde Gumalo.
My name is Mikaela Zieter, and see you next time.